not that it's a character flaw, but I was saying that, like, if you rely only on your athleticism, that it's flawed. It's no way to train martial arts.
True.
Like I said, I was saying that there used to be a guy, like when I was competing, that him and I would end up in the finals all the time. And 9 times out of 10, I beat him. And he was much better than me. He was a much better athlete than I ever was. But he was only relying on his athleticism to win. And he wasn't mastering the craft. He wasn't sensitive to the nuances. And I just would beat him all the time. And he would be pissed. He would not be, we were friends because we were, we ended up being on the same team together and stuff like that. We weren't like enemies, but like he just could not beat me.
Yeah.
He couldn't. And it may be a character flaw, but it also may be that their character is not, it never gets refined because they can rely on something else.
It's a trap. It's a trap. It's a trap that's easy to fall into. It's a trap. It's like it's like the idea of having one super sense, like having incredible vision at the expense of your ability to hear and feel and taste and smell. And it's like having one attribute that's way out of balance with all the others that affords you to get by, not just by, but to get very far. Like athleticism and athletics get you very far.
Yeah.
But athleticism void of strategy, void of asset allocation.
Strong work ethic.
Yeah. And, the mind that goes with it. But you can, I don't know this. I've only observed it because I'm not cursed with athleticism, but I've seen it. And you could see that people get very far in athletics with athleticism. Go figure.
Yeah.
But they don't get far enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's, that when the sheer athleticism is out of balance with people's ability to use their mind strategically, there's a limit. And there's a limit to being able to use your mind strategically without the athleticism.
Right. I was going to say, like, while I don't feel as though I'm very athletic, like I certainly have relied in my training on my strength and size.
Yes.
And that has been a trap as well.
Yes.
Like that's hard. That's a hard one to get out of.
Yeah. Definitely.
You stack up enough injuries though, you realize.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine.
You don't beat it, it beats you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Welcome to the Gentle Art Podcast with Gene Dunn. We have the pleasure of sitting with Kyoshi Thomas Clifford, and we're going to continue our look at Gishin Funakoshi, Master Funakoshi's 20 precepts. The idea is that we would just kind of dive into one of the precepts each podcast. And so today, I wanted to choose one that I think is interesting. And Funakoshi says, think of your hands and feet as swords.
Yes.
And I remember competing and having a friend who was the all-African champion. And he came to train at the dojo, at Mr. Miyazaki's dojo. And he wasn't a big person. He was probably, 5'4", 5'5", 135, 140 pounds. But he crushed everybody. No one that was in our dojo or in competing on the New York circuit in that time could touch the guy. And he said to me, it was his goal to have eyes on his hands and feet.
Oh.
And I thought that was an interesting thing. And it wasn't until later that I discovered what he meant, that like, I think what he meant, how I perceived it, what I learned thinking about it, is that to get at such a level that your conscious mind is like your your technical ability and your unconscious mind is reading the situation much faster than your conscious mind.
Yes.
And then your hands and feet go to the target almost like they have a will of their own. They find their way there without you actually processing. And
Yeah, like the end of the weapon sees the target. You know, the idea that I think the idea of having the eyes on the hands and the feet is that before your eyes see the target, the weapon sees the target. So it's a quicker route, you know, and the hands just find their way. And I obviously the hands and feet don't literally develop eyes, but I do think they develop that kind of
sensitivity,
that response.
the
You know,
response.
yeah, I think so.
You know, I really thought this was an interesting point because when I used to go up to Orangeburg and train and also study your class, I would hear you say to the students like, look, the one thing that I learned about the martial arts is that I'm fragile.
Yes.
And that really stuck with me, much like my friend who'd said that comment. Like it's something I had to kind of ponder because coming out of full contact,
Mhm.
coming out of the the then, you know, what people refer to as like the golden era of jiu-jitsu, like the early 2000s
Mhm.
and late 1990s, the Renzo Gracie Academy, there wasn't any kind of talk or dialogue about us being fragile. In
Yes.
fact, it was the opposite. Like, go out there.
Invincibility.
I think we were trying to prove something,
Mhm.
certainly. So, and I think that the Gracies certainly were trying to make their mark in this country and wanted their students to fulfill that.
Yes.
And so they were producing people that I don't know about if I thought I was invincible,
Mhm.
but I certainly had a mission,
Mhm.
and that was aggressive.
Yes.
You know, and so like I thought I had to think about that a lot. Like, and you know, it certainly did resonate with me. It
Mhm.
certainly was something that like pinged my consciousness. Oh yeah, you're right. Like we're not invincible. And I don't know if it's a good way to like look at martial arts training.
Yeah, well, the reverse is also true. You know, the idea that we're porcelain and that, you know, we're gonna break at every twist and turn, that's also a dysfunction.
Right.
So you have two extremes. You have, you know, the delusion of invincibility, and I'm very much an advocate of the idea of an indomitable spirit or a non-quitting spirit. I like this idea. I also know that the idea of invincibility is naive.
Yeah.
We're not invincible, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, we need some grit. So, you know, you have both ends of the spectrum. You have people who start off and perhaps they have no physical ability. They're inherently weak. They've done nothing to harden themselves, to cultivate their body in any manner. You know, those individuals need to toughen up, so to speak. On the other end of the spectrum, there are those who are too tough for their own good and delude themselves into believing that they're impervious. And it's why, you know, whether it's Kubudo or Kendo or any variety of weapons training, I believe puts a stop to that delusion. Because, you know, we've seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You know, it's not merely a flesh wound. And so the idea of like treat the other person as though their hands and feet were swords.
Right.
It informs us to not think we're going to absorb all of the damage. That there's a lot of damage that can't be absorbed, and we're better off avoiding it. And I think that it's beneficial to treat the other person as though this idea of one punch, one kill
Yeah.
were real,
Right.
even though it often is not. So, my first teacher was 6'6". I'd rather get hit in the face with a baseball bat than with the average person swinging it than him punching me in the face. I really think that him punching me in the face would be worse than the average person swinging, a Louisville Slugger at my skull. So it wasn't abstract to me. Like I looked
Right.
at my first instructor and I look at you,
Right.
and I'd much rather get hit in the face with a bat by a lot of people who don't quite know how to swing it.
Right.
I'm not talking about, Mark McGuire,
Right.
but the average person with a bat or you with your closed hand, flip a coin. I think that they can both change the course of the rest of my life. And I do well to treat your hands as not only as deadly as they are, but deadlier. And your feet not only as deadly as they are, but deadlier.
Oftentimes I try to like repeat this precept
Mm-hmm.
with people, especially doing kata, right? Because I think that it's very easy to lose the intention of karate or martial arts in the training.
Yes.
And I've oftentimes thought, like, did the master like understand that at the entry level of the precept of the concept that the practitioner was to forge themselves in such a way where they became a weapon, but that inside of that track, inside of that pathway, one would arrive to their own humanity and mortality. This kind of like two sides that you're talking about.
I'd like to believe so. I'd like to believe so. Like I think that.
But you do a lot of work to make sure that like people don't get into this like woo-ah state. Like
I try to.
Yeah.
I try to. Like, so here's one big thing. Like if you look at my understanding of the origins of Shotokan, of Japanese karate, and its Okinawan origin and its Chinese influences, this is a time when people are not a stranger to it's highly likely the other person's going to have a sword.
Right.
So it wasn't abstract. It wasn't like, you didn't have to like.
And certainly society was not polite, right? Like it.
Well, whether it was polite or impolite, or barbaric or civilized, like people had a sword at their side.
Right.
It wasn't uncommon. There was a long reign of terror on the island where the samurai, like, go figure, the samurai were allowed to have weapons and the peasants weren't.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So, there was a ban on weaponry, but that didn't cause people to lose their, maybe appreciation's the wrong word, but their fear of it and their understanding that it's more than likely they're going to be up against someone with a 3-foot long sword, that weapons are real, that weapons exist, and that you do well to consider mortal combat something that's going to involve a deadly weapon of one kind or another. And that pairs down into the empty hands. I think the idea that the empty hands is void of that.
So it came from it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, look, let's go back further. And neither of us were there. Like none of us were there, but it makes sense that people were fighting with sticks and stones and broken bones, not broken bones in their own body,
Right.
but broken bones they found on the floor.
A woolly mammoth's bone.
Yeah, long before they said, let's knuckle up. Like, I can't afford to knuckle up with you. Because if I knuckle up with you, I'm going to break, even if I win, I'm going to break my hand.
Right.
And if I break my hand, I'm half dead.
Right.
So I do well to pick up something sharp or solid and use that to protect my hand. Now, when I lose that piece of broken bone or that sharpened stick or stone or bronze or whatever that weapon was, when I lose it, when I'm disarmed, I drop it, so on. Now I have to use my bare hands. And my bare hands mechanically move in ways that are patterned after the wielding of the weapon.
Right.
So if a straight thrust to your heart
with
a broken off piece of bone is a punch.
Right.
It's a much more potent punch with the broken off piece of bone.
Right.
But it's still potent without the broken off piece of bone if I learn how to make a fist and I learn how to focus my force into my first two knuckles, etc. And I believe that's how barehanded skills evolved.
That's right.
More as a last resort. So I think the idea that the weaponry evolved out of the barehanded technique is a misnomer.
Even jujitsu.
Sure.
Jujitsu came out of the
lose your sword.
Lose your sword. That's right.
Yeah. So, it doesn't take a lot to, we've talked about this before, I think, on the podcast, is, Margaret Mead is famous for saying that the first sign of civilization was a healed femur.
That's right.
So a healed femur meant that somebody had to take care of the person whose thigh bone was broken.
That's correct.
In order for it to heal, because a person with a broken femur without protection is called food.
Yep.
So, okay, it's the first sign of civilization because based on her statements, if they're to be true, if she even said them, and I believe she did, I have no reason to doubt it, but if you peel the onion of that statement, certainly it reflects civilization, it reflects nurture and love, but it also suggests by deductive reasoning that somebody was there to protect these people while they were taking care of each other.
Right.
The warrior class is what affords the rest of the tribe or the society or the civilization to provide nurture and support.
Let me ask you something. Like, what do you think is more problematic? The person who does not have the education, the what you talked about, like there's the weak, someone who's come into the martial arts who has done nothing to fortify,
to cultivate their body, perhaps their mind.
That's right,
not their body.
Right, through the physical training, right? So it's considered, one way to put it is weak or weaker person, right?
Frail.
Yeah. Or a person who is like slips into arrogance because they're training. Like what's more problematic for you, and how do you approach those points?
I think they're both extremely dangerous. I think both extremes are extraordinarily dangerous.
I think trying to pull both poles to the middle.
Yeah. I think there's that you need a balance between the two.
And how does martial arts do that?
Very effectively. So potentially. But sometimes what it does is it just throws fuel on the physical fire.
Right.
It could also throw fuel on the intellectual fire. And people become sinister and diabolical. See, like one way of getting away with being a weakling is to become extraordinarily sinister and diabolical.
Right.
And we see this throughout history.
Yeah.
You certainly don't need to be capable yourself of being formidable physically to get other people to do your bidding.
Right.
Or do your fighting. So training, I believe, serves to solve both problems.
I have a deep concern because a lot of people, I think, come into at least my dojo. A good amount of people come into my dojo or to the dojo, and I feel as though they're looking to solve that problem. They know they're frail, and this, like, they bump into this point of consider your hands and feet like swords, and it's too much for them. At least at the entry level, or at least before they get some measure of confidence and competence. Competence, then confidence, right? And I want to appeal more to and help someone that feels very vulnerable in that process, in that transition forward. Not that the ultimate goal is for them to go out and knock someone out.
Certainly not.
But
certainly not.
They have a measure of confidence that otherwise they would never have achieved, pursued.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right. People can be diabolical.
Yeah.
I don't think that way. So, it doesn't really
It doesn't enter
occur
your
to me.
consciousness.
No.
But
Maybe I'm afforded that right because I'm the size
sure,
that I
it's
am.
a natural
right?
defense. I mean, like size and strength don't matter. That's adorable. Like they
Yeah.
certainly do matter.
Yeah.
And
But so does diabolical.
yeah, and
Yeah.
sinister and mean spirited.
Yeah.
And I feel like because I'm so fragile and delicate and vulnerable that it affords me the right
hmm
to
To be manipulative.
yeah,
Yeah.
in my
It's
own
fascinating.
wacky, kooky, sinister way.
Yeah.
My own lunacy somehow because I've been dealt a different hand. I'm not 6'6" and 260 pounds, etc. So like I get to be a mean person.
Right.
I get to hurt people in um less than direct ways.
Right.
Less than direct ways.
So
Non-appearingly confrontational ways.
So then the martial arts helps.
I think it does. It can help. Like look, this is the if I as your student don't have the desire to solve these problems,
Right.
then you can't solve them for me.
Right.
But you are a phenomenal resource to help me, to guide me to solve these problems. So, one way you do it is look, think of your own hands and feet, think about your own arms and legs, think about your body as a potentially lethal weapon. And I hear that and I kind of roll my eyes and I think to myself, like, I'm like Felix Unger. Like I have a delicate back. Like I'm a weakling. I was born to be a weakling. And this guy's telling me that, my body and my mind that I am potentially a deadly weapon. And I kind of roll my eyes at it. And then you might say to me, I want you to pretend that the other people in the class, imagine the other people in the class, their arms and legs, their limbs are like swords. And I say, you know what? That makes sense.
Right.
That makes sense. Like I don't have the confidence and I don't want to take on the responsibility to recognize that in and of myself, but I certainly can see what you mean about that guy over there.
Mm-hmm.
Like that guy over there, he's kicked me a few times and
Mm-hmm.
I get what you mean. And I would do well to have more respect, revere and respect the deadly potential of those limbs and not be so cavalier about the possibility of having all my teeth knocked out. I give you a good example. Like, um, Mike Tyson, the fighter, the
Yeah.
boxer,
Yeah.
not Mike Tyson, the felon, but Mike
Yeah.
Tyson, the boxer. I believe that he had, if not the best head movement in the heavyweight division of his time, including Muhammad Ali. And people will say, no, it's not true. Tyson's communicating quite well into his
That's right. Into
late
his
50s.
50s.
Yeah. I don't think he took near the amount of punishment that God rest
Right.
his soul.
Right.
I revere them both.
Yeah.
But what I think happened is I think that Customato, the hypnotist, convinced Mike Tyson that everyone in his division not only hit as hard as he did, but harder.
Right.
And that informed his head movement.
Right.
He believed that the other people, and my understanding of Tyson coming up is he was terrified.
Terrified.
Yeah, terrified.
Yeah.
And I think that Customato
Use
really,
that to his benefit.
conditioned him quite effectively to believe that, Mike, those other guys, not only they hit as hard as you hit, they hit harder.
Yeah.
Well, that changed his head movement.
Uh-huh.
And that because he treated their hands like deadly weapons.
Right.
There's an old story about Cuss. Like Cuss, when he was coming up, I don't know if Cuss fought professionally, but I know he fought as an amateur. He was going to have a fight with a guy, knife fight. As a kid in the neighborhood who wanted to, challenged him to a knife fight. Like, go figure. Like, he could have avoided it, perhaps.
Right.
But in the days of old, when the knights were bold, maybe his honor was at stake. So he didn't know how to knife fight. He had no idea, like no experience with it. Didn't really understand it, but he understood boxing.
Yeah.
You whether Cuss himself was ever world class or not, he was certainly, as far as the
Student, yes,
understanding
certainly,
and
yeah,
student and instructor of the game,
yeah,
one of the greatest ever. This is early in his maturation. So rather than get a knife, what he did is he took ice picks, 2 ice picks, and he taped them inside his fist. So he formed the fist around the ice picks, the ice picks projecting straight out like Wolverine.
yeah,
Taped them up, and they faced off, and right away the other kid with the knife just dropped the knife and said, "Forget it," because he knew that
right,
Cuss is just going to apply the timing and the distance that he cultivated so well. Now he's got spikes in his hands, the equivalent of knives, more deadly because an ice pick's going to puncture and not slash. And the guy drops his weapon.
right.
So it's not, no one had to use their imagination.
So
That's a graphic
you
example.
think that, like, if I'm hearing you correctly, like the pathway for someone who's considers themselves frail or has not done the work associated with developing confidence would be to do well, to consider that other people can hurt them, but they know that already.
Yeah, they should, but they should consider that they can cultivate that as well, and to not be so foolish, naive, arrogant, and lazy to just write it off as, well, I'm nonviolent. That's not for me.
Right.
No, that is for you, sweetheart, because you have a responsibility to protect yourself.
Right.
Because if you don't, then you're a burden on those who can. So you ought to be able to protect yourself within your own potential.
Thank you for listening to the Gentle Art Podcast. Please share, rate, and review. And if you have any questions or you'd like to reach out, please contact us at the GentleArtPodcast@gmail.com, or contact us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or thegentleartpodcast.com.